was unexpected, if his word to wives was expected. His word to husbands ran counterculture. Instead of husbands, control your family, or husbands, control your wives, keep them in order, he wrote instead, husbands, love your wives in the same way that Christ loved the church and gave his life up for her. Roman patriarchs normally ruled their wives as they ruled everything else in their lives. But for Christian husbands, the words that Paul wrote were striking. They were to lead their homes like Christ rather than like Caesar. They were to serve rather than to count on being served. There are three pairs of relationships described in Ephesians 5. Patriarch-wife, patriarch-child, patriarch-slave. In each of the pairs, the patriarch is the strongest one by far. In the Roman household, he has the right to tell others to bow down and to serve him. But the Christian household is different, whether in ancient Rome, southern Africa, or southern California. The household value which Paul describes permeating all household relationships is found in verse 21. Mutual submission. An imitation of Christ, who submitted himself to the will of the Father. Paul isn't calling the patriarch to abandon his position of influence. He's calling him to use it differently, to give up his sense of entitlement and replace it with a servant's heart toward his wife, toward his children, toward his workers and others in the household and community. It may trouble us that Paul didn't call for an end to the unequal Roman social order. But what Paul was aiming for was a change of heart, a change in character, which can happen within any kind of household, whether it's matriarchal and there are some matriarchal cultures, matriarchal, patriarchal, or egalitarian. The beauty of mutual submission, putting the other person first, is that it can happen in any culture, in any societal structure, whether a woman runs the house or a man, or whether two people share decision-making responsibility. Every culture is different. Every family is different. Every person in every family has different gifts and graces given to them by God. And so do I think that Paul in Ephesians 5 was setting up a household order for all time, with the husband, father, master at the top and everyone else underneath? No, I think he was speaking into an existing order rather than establishing one. Is one's ability to lead in the home and the church dependent on gender? No. If not, then what are the factors? How about culture, family history, spiritual gifts, natural talent, personality? A family can be Christian whether a woman is the head of a household or a man, or whether two together share decision-making. The key, I think, lies in verse 21, submitting to one another. No one, not the head of the household, whether it's male or female, is the king of the castle, is the lord of the manor, except for Jesus in the Christian home. And so, while I think we should not imitate the household structure of Ephesians 5, I believe that the central value of mutual submission is what God wants to infuse into our lives and into our homes. But how does that happen in practical terms? It's hard to put the other person first because we're naturally self-centered, aren't we? And so is submitting ourselves to one another an unattainable ideal, or is there a way we can begin to live it out successfully? I've shared with you before in our series in Ephesians that the entire letter of Ephesians to the Ephesians in Greek is actually a series of really long sentences that run through several English paragraphs. And what our translators have done to make it more readable is to break up Paul's long thoughts into bite-sized sentences and paragraphs. But in the process of reading in short sentences, what we miss sometimes are Paul's most central thoughts. In the Greek language, verse 18 has the main verb and thus controls the following verses in chapter 5 and on into chapter 6. Verse 18 says this, be filled with the Spirit. That's the command. And so the way it reads is be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another, singing praise, thanking God and submitting, all being filled with the Spirit. That's the command. So being filled with the Spirit, we're to worship. Worship is an overflow of being filled with the Spirit. Speaking in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Thanksgiving is an overflow of being filled with the Spirit. And living in relationship with our family members and our church family in submission to one another is an overflow of being filled with the Spirit. And so ultimately, the secret to home sweet home doesn't lie in changing our family structure, whether we live in a Roman villa, an African hut, or a California rancher condo. The secret to a happy home and to a happy church is each person with humility coming under the reign of Jesus Christ and trusting the Spirit of Christ to fill us with love and power. And so when the Spirit humbles our hearts and fills our homes, there can be forgiveness, there can be healing, and the ability to trust each other in new ways. So even though I'm sure we'd all like to have one of those nice brand new Roman villas, let's not try and replicate the Roman household here in Southern California. Instead, let's be Christian. Let's trust Jesus to fill us with His Spirit. Let's allow the Spirit to work in and through each family member according to their gifts and graces. And let's lay our lives down in mutual submission before one another in our families, in the church also, which is the family or the household of God. May it be so.